Hi everyone, welcome to another park recreation series. So I know after I finished my Cedar Point recreation, I said that I probably wasn't going to be starting another one just because they are a lot of work, take a lot of time. It's been some time now since I finished that up and I'm starting to get that creative itch again, and I think it's about time to start up another big project. So we are going to be recreating Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Maybe a bit of an odd choice, probably not everyone's first choice for a park. But I recently went on a trip over there and I liked it quite a bit, and I think it would also make a pretty good RCT park specifically, just because of the way the park is laid out, the different rides are laid out, the types of rides that it has. It does have a lot of similarities to Cedar Point as well, as far as different ride types go, some of the look and feel, which I think is going to help make it a little bit easier as well to get things pieced together. Now, I'm of course no expert on Dorney whatsoever. I've only been there one time for one day. So it's going to be significant more guesswork and creative liberty on this one compared to Cedar Point, but I think that might actually wind up being a benefit overall, just because I'm going to focus a little bit more on trying to make it look nice as opposed to being 100% realistic. So as we go forward here, if this is your home park, you might notice that there's going to be some maybe not super realistic details. But I think it might be good to try to branch away a little bit from the style we did in Cedar Point and try to make this again a nice looking park as opposed to realistic. But as far as all of the major rides, the coasters go, we're going to try to get those nailed down as best as we can. So I'm looking forward to getting this started here. So why don't we open up a new sandbox park and we'll begin. So I'm going to be taking a very slightly different approach to starting this park as I did with the Cedar Point recreation, trying to learn a little bit from my experience there. And we're going to be focusing at the beginning on layouts of the park and layouts of the rides as I did before, but maybe a slightly different way. So what we're going to do today is get down some rough drafts for all of the major tracked rides, so all the coasters and a couple other rides as well, just so we have an idea of what the footprints for those coasters are going to look like, and then we can kind of piece the whole park together at once, while also filling in some sketches for footpaths and buildings, and trying to give it more of a holistic approach, rather than doing everything very gradually like I did with Cedar Point. I feel like it's going to be a bit easier here since the park is going to be a lot smaller, and hopefully we'll get some good results out of it, so I don't know, we'll see. But first we're going to start off with just getting down some rough drafts of all of the roller coasters and see how big they wind up being. And then later on, we'll start piecing things together. So we're going to be starting today with Hydra the Revenge, the B&M Floorless Coaster. Not for any particular reason, but I did a draft of this already once before, so I've got it a little bit better in my head right now what the layout should look like. So like I said, we're going to be just doing a basic layout here. I'm starting with the twister track, but we're going to be probably switching it partway through to using the LIM track, just so we can have access to the 0G roll and the medium-sized loop, so I think this ride really does need. Alright, I think this is going to be our final first draft of Hydra. Turns out this is actually a pretty tricky layout in RCT for just a couple small reasons. Getting the balance right between speed and heights of elements like the 0G roll and especially the Cobra roll is pretty difficult. I had to make the hill a little bit taller a few times than I originally intended. Some of the turnarounds are a bit strange here as well, and some hill profiling, turn profiling, all a little bit janky. But like I said, this is going to be a first draft. We're definitely going to rebuild this at least one more time before we call it good. But this is going to get us an idea of the scale of things, how much space it's going to take up, and especially inform how big the other coasters are going to be in comparison to it, so we can help piece things together a little bit more easily. So there you go, there's Hydra for now. Alright, next up let's work on something a little bit smaller and do Wild Mouse. This one should hopefully be pretty straightforward, but we'll find out here. Alright, so here we have our rough layout for Wild Mouse. Don't know if we're going to get much better than this anyway. All things considered, this is one of those cases where we really need a 45-degree lift hill, and we just don't have it in RCT because of the small scale of the Wild Mouse. The pieces really need to fit together a certain way. We can simulate a 45-degree lift hill by alternating 30 and 60-degree hills, and from far away you can't really tell, but if you zoom in it looks a little wobbly and it's kind of silly looking. That being said, I think for the scale we're going for here, the turns that are going to require for this layout and everything could do a lot worse. Definitely looks like we're not going to be able to run a full 8 cars on this thing either, because the block break situations means that we're going to have cars stopping all over the place, but not a big deal. We'll trim that down here later. It is funny that Wild Mouse coasters, they look so big when you stand up next to them because there's so much track and support work all kind of bunched together, but compared to a much larger coaster like Hydra here, they're pretty small. Hopefully that means it won't be too hard to shove it in wherever it needs to go. But yeah, that'll do for now for Wild Mouse. Alrighty, next up I think we're going to work on Thunderhawk, the old school wooden coaster. This one's going to be a little bit tricky too because it has a slightly diagonal chain lift, but I think I'm going to ignore that and just keep that one on the orthogonal plane so I don't have to worry about it. And just tweak the station position a little bit so things are going to be slightly differently placed, but hopefully not too different. I have to make sure that there's enough room for the exit path going over top here. So weird turnaround here at the beginning. Not weird, but it's just very elongated, which is unusual. Something like that. Anyway, let's get going. Alright, here is our rough draft layout for Thunderhawk. For what should be a pretty simple wooden coaster, again, kind of a couple tricky things going on here. Particularly this turnaround here at the end. Getting this shape of this turnaround is surprisingly challenging, considering that the ways that the track goes over and under itself. So I'm not totally happy with this, but that is okay. As I mentioned, these are rough drafts, and we'll be rebuilding these at least once or twice before the park is done. So just trying to get an idea of how big things are going to be. All right, let's knock a couple of easy ones out of the way here. Alright, I think this is about the correct scale we want for Possessed. At least based on, measurements of the other coasters. Obviously, measuring things is not going to get us necessarily a good scale, but it can give us a good, rough idea. Alright, one more easy build for right now. Another straight and unassuming looking ride. Throw in a little placeholder here for a demon drop. Okay, this is probably way too tall, but it's going to be about this length, I think. We might want to make it a little bit longer, actually, now that I'm looking at it, just to make the proportions look a little bit more normal. But its length compared to Possessed's length, it's about this size. But we'll play with it a bit more when we do the real build later on. But it's going to be something like that. Definitely doesn't look like it has enough braking space with this size, so I guess it's going to be kind of by itself in the park anyway. There's not a whole lot of other stuff directly around it, so we can probably sneak some other stuff in there. Now that I'm looking at it, let's see if we can make this a little bit more normal looking. Alright, maybe something like that. I think I've built the whole thing here backwards anyway, so this isn't going to be functional regardless, so we'll fix it all up later. But I think this is about what we're going for. Alright, one more simple coaster, one last simple coaster. We'll have all the easy ones out of the way, which is Woodstock Express, the little junior coaster in the Planet Snoopy area. If again we were going by proportions, this one probably should only be like 8 tiles wide, which is pretty tiny. So it's going to take up a big bulky area in Planet Snoopy that it really shouldn't. This is going to be kind of tricky. Kind of the same problems we had with Wilderness Run over in Cedar Point, trying to get everything crammed in there correctly. So we'll do the best we can with this one, especially considering it's not just a basic oval or figure 8. We'll see what we can do. Alright, here we go. Our Woodstock Express. Like I figured, we really can't shove this into 8 tiles. This is more like, yeah, like 17 tiles, over twice as big as it really needs to be, as it should be. But we'll make things work out. Alright, just a couple coasters left to go for our rough drafts, and I think the next one we'll do is Talon, the B&M Invert. I haven't done a rough draft of this one off camera yet, but I have seen a pretty good recreation of this one already that I'm going to be using as a little bit of reference, but this one will mostly be my own creation, as I try to do for all my coasters. So let's see how this goes. All right, here is our finished rough draft of Talon. So it ended up being a little bit smaller than I thought it was going to be, especially compared to our rough draft of Hydra, but I think that really just means that our rough draft of Hydra is probably a little bit too big. Fortunately, since it's kind of near the edge of the park, we can trim Hydra down later. I like Talon being a little bit compact though, because it's in the middle of a lot of stuff. It gives us some breathing room later on. So I like this footprint for now. Obviously some things we're going to need tweaked later. There's definitely some awkward transitions in here, and that last corkscrew helix thing is a little bit awkward. But for now, this is going to do, so pretty happy with that. Which leaves just one coaster left to design for today. Alright, so here we have a pretty basic layout for Steel Force. Nothing too crazy. It's a pretty simple layout, all things considered. A couple of hills, a big helix at the end. Honestly, the toughest part of building this coaster for real is going to be that helix. I put in some track pieces that the Hyper coaster doesn't have with the LAM coaster to try to get the elevation quite right, but it makes the profiling look terrible. Fortunately, again, this helix is kind of at the edge of the park. It can be tweaked really easily when we get to actually building this for real, so I'm not too concerned about making this look good just yet. Mostly just concerned with making sure that the layout looks good for now. Definitely looks like we have enough speed to raise that mid-course brake run a little bit and stretch this helix area out even further. And I think we probably are going to have to, because now that I'm looking at it, Steel Force goes down basically the entire length of the park. And it's got Thunderhawk and Hydra pretty much nestled in it side by side. It looks like we've made it way too small for the amount of space we're going to need later. So let's actually see if we can stretch this out even more. It's going to look pretty weird considering the limitations we have with making these hills look a certain way in RCT, but I'll do my best. Alright, I'm not sure how much bigger I actually made it. It's kind of hard to tell just from looking. I think this is going to have to do for now. It's pretty much impossible to make that helix any bigger without making it look like an octagon, even more so than it already does. I think we're just going to have to stick with this for now, and we'll tweak the layout as we get closer to finishing the layout of the entire park, which we're going to be doing up here in the next episode. There are a couple other tracked rides that I could work on. For example, the log flume, the splash boats, the river rapids. But I'm not super concerned about accuracy for those. I just want to get the coasters in place first, and then we can kind of shove the log flume and everything else in around them. And then for the river rapids, it's way at the back of the park. It's not going to have any problems looking like it needs to look like. So aside from this, next steps are going to be putting these in the right place, putting some path markers down, some building markers down, and some placeholders for all the upcoming flat rides. And then of course tweaking the layouts for these to make them all look a little bit nicer. But I'm pretty happy with these first drafts, and I'm looking forward to sticking them together into an actual park. So hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.